Business and Technology, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2017-18 edition of the College of Business and Technology Distinguished Speaker Series. Each year, the college brings leaders of business, industry, and government to the EKU campus to address students, faculty, and members of the Richmond community and surrounding areas on current topics and issues. Our partner for today's events is the Richmond Chamber of Commerce. Today, we are honored to have Mr. William P. or Bill Reddick, Principal and Co-Manager of Reddick and Murphy Consulting in Atlanta, Georgia, as this fall's distinguished speaker. Mr. Reddick is an EKU alum, a 1987 BBA in accounting graduate, and here to introduce him is Ms. Haley Robar, a senior right from here in Richmond. Haley is one of our very best students from the Departments of Accounting, Finance, and Information Systems. She's double majoring in public accounting and financial planning. Right now, Haley is set to graduate in the spring of 2019, but she's debating on adding one more major in risk management and insurance, and would also like to work in a financial services internship sometime next year. If you think that sounds like a lot, and it is, to make all of this happen, Haley is a full-time manager at Wendy's right here in Richmond, where she oversees daily the operations of the Richmond store. Many EKU students work to support their educational goals, but Haley's focus and drive are really paying off with a stellar GPA and excellent prospects. In her free time, and my guess is as a person who worked his way through college, there's not a lot of it, but in her free time, when that might be, she enjoys companionship with her dogs and cat, meeting up with a few friends, and hiking the pinnacles in Berea. All that said, Haley is excited to see what her future holds once she graduates from EKU. So thank you for joining us today, Haley, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce Bill Reddick.
Our speaker, Mr. William Bill Reddick, comes to us originally from Knoxville, Tennessee, but currently he resides in Atlanta, Georgia, where he co-manages Reddick and Murphy Consulting. In his spare time, he likes to play golf and tennis and let his yellow lab Rosebud take him for walks. He's married to a school teacher, Millie, with whom he has two children, Patrick and Rose, and his journey started right here at EKU, like most of us. He was on the swim team, and he graduated with a bachelor's in business administration with concentrations in accounting and what was at the time the healthcare administration option. From here, he went to the University of Houston, where he got his master's in health administration. Shortly after, he worked for Arthur Andersen and Company for about 2 years, I think, is what your pamphlet says. And from there, he was a purchasing director at Northside Hospital, after which he co-founded a hedge fund. Following, he opened Celtaxis, a biopharmaceutical company, and now he's here, ready to speak to you. And without further ado, Mr. Bill Reddick himself.
Thank you. Thank you, Haley. You did a better job of doing that than I could without any notes. But I also noticed from your LinkedIn page that you work full-time and you go to school full-time, so you already understand really what's going to be the gist and the focus of my presentation. So thank you very much. I was a little bit nervous when the dean first called because as a student at Eastern, I had been called by deans a couple of times previously, and it never turned out well. Someone always lost an ID. Not saying who it was, but I was just much happier when I was told that my opportunity was to meet with you. What he asked me to do really was talk to you about my experiences at Eastern, but what I would like to start by doing is tell you a story. Move this out of the way. Tell you a story, and it's a good story, and it has the added benefit of being a true story It really, again, this story will tie back to much of what I'm going to say during the presentation. In 2012, I was taught a gentleman how to swim, and he invited me to participate in a 5K open water swim with him, and that's 3.1 miles. And I couldn't really turn him down, and so with very little consideration and no preparation, I agreed to join him. And so when I signed up, I was the 31st person to sign up, and I thought, you know, it's going to be a couple of old folks, some, triathletes, but not really a big deal. So I didn't really think that much about it. But when I got to the lake, which was north of Atlanta, there was a traffic jam getting into the parking lot, so I knew that I had a problem. And as I got to registration, Rowdy Gaines, who, if any of you guys remember from the Olympics or you follow swimming at all, was the announcer. And while I was doing that, he announced that there was going to be 700 people in the race. He announced, forgot to mention that it was in it was right after the London Olympics. He mentioned that there was going to be 24 Olympians in the race. And so as I approached the beginning of the race, there was 699 people that looked like they were ready to be on the cover of Swimming World magazine, and me in my red swimming trunks. So not a very exciting moment for me. But as the race started, the way you start a race like that is single file, and you just go one by one, and they put RFD, they make you wear a bathing cap, which I don't like. They put an RFD around my ankle. They said it was so they could make sure I finished the race, but I'm pretty sure it was so they could find me at the bottom of the lake. But you decide what you want to believe. But a funny thing happened as I dove into the water. I completely panicked, and every time I took a breath, I looked back at the beach. And every time I looked at the beach, it got farther away, so then I started looking at the rescue kayaks, and I had the sense they were looking at me too. But I made it to the first buoy. And the buoys looked a lot smaller in the water than they did on the land. So circled that buoy, started heading for the second buoy, and I don't know how it happened, but I just decided to keep going, and all I had to do was make it to that second buoy. And I did so, and then in the second, the third, the fourth, and eventually I made it the whole way. And what I'm trying to say is not that you should do things you're unprepared for against Olympians, but rather if you'll just keep going, if you'll keep moving, if you'll keep heading toward your target, that's the most important thing. Persistence is the most important thing the most important skill that you can have. And so in 1983, the next buoy for me was Eastern Kentucky University. My high school coach swam here. I came up, I met the team, I met the coach who's here today. I saw the campus, fell in love, and signed a scholarship. One of the funny things to me in retrospect, I remember thinking the coach, who I guess would have been 32 at the time, 20 years younger than me today, I remember thinking, you know, my goodness, he's so old and yet he still has an admiration for Eastern, so there must be something good going on there. But perspective changes a little bit. In terms of how I got here, I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I saw some Vol fans in the crowd, so shout out to you. Thank you. Not many people are wearing Tennessee clothes right now, so thank you for wearing it. I was the 11th of 12 children, which is a mixed blessing. It means that I don't need very much attention. I have 4 older brothers, and that means that I flinch a lot, so don't come up behind me suddenly. I have 7 sisters, and that means I can follow directions well. Still to this day, I get directions on a regular basis. I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't have a strategy. I didn't have a plan. And by the way, that's something you can change. Anything that you brought with you to college, you don't have to take with you your whole life. You can change, you can grow while you're here. You can become more strategic. It can become a transformative event for you. I graduated in the bottom 25% of my class. I'm exaggerating. I graduated in the bottom 10% of my class. I was very unfocused. And Coach used to tell me that, you know, son, you're from West Knox County. Bottom 10% is not where you want to stay. So work on that. In terms of how Eastern helped prepare me, I had just the great good fortune of having some great professors. I picked my major based on the back of the ACT. There was a pie chart, and on that pie chart it said that I should be an engineer, and that's really the extent of my decision-making process. So with that serious thought, I became an engineer, or an engineering student, let me say. Did not become an engineer. But I met professors, even in that program, as I struggled through the curriculum, that were very supportive of me and helped me transition as I moved into a field that I fell in love with, which was accounting. Just all throughout the experience, teachers that are no longer here today, but you're going to look back and you're going to think of teachers that were here. There was a guy named Ward Wright, and he was a professor here. He had been a student at University of Chicago. He had a PhD from USC. He had been an Army Ranger. He worked for one of the most impressive consulting firms in the world. And he was right here and available to me as a student. And I think if you get to know your professors, you'll find equally impressive people here. Eastern has your peers. Your peers are important. You're going to run into these people for the rest of your life, especially if you stay in Kentucky. And so you're leaving impressions with them right now. You're gonna run into them in situations, and I'm not trying to wring all the fun out of college, but if their best story about you is your ability to do a keg stand, it's not gonna be helpful when you're applying for a job at Procter & Gamble and they are involved in that process. So really think about that a little bit and be a little bit more introspective. One of the things in terms of thinking about what Eastern did for me, I learned to be more introspective. I learned to think a little bit more about why I do what I do. One of the companies I'm going to tell you about was a drug company that was making drugs for cystic fibrosis. And on my office, I had a sign that said 70,000. And every time I walked in my office, it was the only thing on the wall behind my desk. And it reminded me that there's 70,000 people in the world with cystic fibrosis. There's 70,000 sets of parents. There's 70,000 sets of siblings, 70,000 grandparents that want me to do something useful at work today. So even when I'm tired, even when I feel like I've given a good effort, there's people that are desperately hoping that I'll do something useful at work that day. And I find things like that to be very meaningful. And what that essentially is knowing why you do what you do. So please spend some time thinking about that and know why you do what you do, and it will make all the difference. Next to that sign, I have a birth announcement that I received from a guy named Mark Zeppelin, and he sent it to me in August of 2001, about 30 days before he died in the World Trade Center. And I guess the reason that I have that there is because it reminds me of just how incredibly fortunate that I am every single day just to have a chance to go to work and try to do something productive. And again, you need to know why you do what you do to be the best that you can be. In terms of Eastern, I spent 5 years on the campus of Georgia Tech. I spent 5 years on the campus of Harvard. Eastern has all the bells and whistles. Eastern has the tools, if you adopt them, that will help you succeed in the world. There's not some special secret in the library at Georgia Tech. you've got the resources. And I think really the question, and I sort of paraphrased John F. Kennedy here, the question is not what is Eastern going to do for you, but what are you going to do with what Eastern has provided to you? And you have all these resources, and it's just a matter of deciding what you want to do with it. Next question I was asked to answer was about what is it that employers are looking for. And I can tell you what I'm looking for, and I've already talked a little bit about it, and that's persistence. You just won't meet your objectives if you can't stick to things. You're going to run into hurdles. Things are going to not go your way. You're going to have bad days. Your kids are going to call you at the worst time with the worst news. And you have to be persistent. Another thing that I think is people are looking for, companies are looking for, is people that will become valuable before they become rich. I came to Eastern, I didn't have a car until I was 23, which my son can't believe, but if you focus on making yourself valuable, the rewards will follow. But if you're waiting on the rewards, they're not going to come to you. You have to make yourself valuable. You have to think about, I'm not saying you shouldn't pay special attention to your job, you should, but you should also think about what is it that the people that are at the next level are doing? What skills do they have that I don't have? And how can I adopt and gain some of those skills? You should know your boss's goals. And that might sound a little bit obsequious to you, or I guess more colloquially, it might sound like I'm brown-nosing. But you should know what your boss's goals are, because your boss, you can follow your boss all the way through that organization and other organizations. And don't you think that the boss is going to be more open? I have found the work environment is absolutely a meritocracy. If you're helping him or her achieve their goals, they're going to find a place for you everywhere they go. And also, don't you imagine that their goals tie to the goals of the corporation, tie to the overall strategy, tie to the success and the survival of the company. So just ask them, what are the 5 things you want to do this year? Get an answer and then write it down somewhere where you can look at it regularly and help make it happen. The other thing, and this is really a key thesis of what I've done, is volunteer. And I'm talking about not in the United Way sense of the word, but in the Army sense of the word. And by that I mean volunteer to do things that nobody else in the organization wants to do, but absolutely need to be done. Every great job I've ever gotten, every single one, I volunteered to do something which directly led to that job. So learn how to volunteer while you're here. If you're part of a student group, don't just ride drive. If you're part of a fraternity, do something to help in the leadership of the fraternity. So one other thing that I'd like to talk about is, well, 3 other things. One is creativity. There's a great book called A Whack in the Side of the Head, and it's important to be creative. I worked for a drug development company, and the scientist came in and said, and if there's any biology majors in here, they'll understand this. They said, we need some immune-privileged tissue. Well, I had no idea what that was, so I asked them. And they said, basically, there's places in the body where the immune system doesn't go, and we need some of that tissue to test it for our hypothesis. And they said reproductive organs, brain, several other places. And so then they left. They sort of dumped it on my table and said, we need some immune-privileged tissue. So I started thinking, and every day when I drove to work, I went past the Atlanta Humane Society, and they had a big billboard up, and it said, spay and neuter your pet. And so I thought to myself, well, that's probably a place I can get some research material, reproductive organs. And so I actually went over to the Atlanta Humane Society, and basically for giving them a pizza lunch, they provided us a lot of material, and you may think that's silly, but that tissue allowed us to discover a protein that we filed a patent on that they didn't, of course, put my name on the patent, even though I got the tissue, because I wasn't a scientist. But they never do. But we got the tissue, they filed a patent, and then we did a partnership with the Ovarian Cancer Center, and it turns out that the same protein that's inducing immune cells away from the reproductive organs is also working in ovarian cancer, which makes a ton of sense if you think about it. And am I telling you we discovered a cure for ovarian cancer? No. Have we discovered a drug for ovarian cancer? No, maybe, maybe not. But by being a little bit creative, we have a shot on goal. And creativity is what people are looking for. There's also times when you don't want to be creative. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, as they say. And if you want some extra reading, there's a great book called The Medici Effect. But I worked for a hospital, and we had trouble registering patients. And if you've been to a hospital, you know what I'm talking about. You sit in the lobby for 2 hours, and then you arrive at the appointed time. You sit in the lobby for 2 hours, and then you get where you're going. So the CEO of the hospital said to me, well, why don't you go to a hotel? Why don't you go over to Ritz-Carlton? Why don't you go to the Marriott and figure out how they get people in? Because they get people in a lot faster than we do. Well, I thought it was sort of silly, but I did it anyway. And it turns out that, in fact, Marriott does know how to register people, does know how to get people out of the lobby, does know how to get people to the room. So sometimes you don't need to be creative. If it's something like that you can think of, is there anybody else that has this problem? And then you can, and people love to be asked, I've found. They don't, it's not like you're invading their privacy or you're getting a corporate secret. If you go to someone and say, hey, you do a good job at this, can you help me understand how you do it? It's an enormous compliment. And I found that most of the time people will respond well to entreaties like that. So sometimes creative, sometimes not. Just depends on the situation. And I guess last but not least in this department is they're looking for people that can be kind and empathetic. I learned probably more about hospital administration being an orderly at the Texas Heart Institute than I did at the University of Houston in graduate school. And if you can be a good coworker, if you can be the kind of person that's supportive of employees, of patients, a lot of this stuff is not in your books. It's in your DNA and how you react every day. And I'll never forget the first day I was in a hospital administration job. A young lady walked in my office, and she said, literally my first day at work. It was my first day after graduating from the University of Houston. And she said, I am having an affair, my husband is having an affair, and I want to kill myself. Well, we didn't cover that in my graduate program. And so what do you do with that? Well, the first thing you have to do with that is be empathetic, and you have to be interested in helping them solve the problem. And with this particular situation, we helped her with employee assistance program and resolved the problem as well as could be resolved. And she was a good employee for a number of years after that, and then she moved on to another organization. But kindness and empathy can go a long way. The final suggested topic was how I got to where I am today, and it's a little bit of a humbling question because I know all of my flaws. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. I know where I'd ride off the rails. And that's actually a wonderful, wonderful thing if you know where you go off the rails, because that tells you where you need to focus as you continue to develop. Quit worrying about what you don't know and start learning it. You'll never know everything. Don't wait until you're perfect to go out and give it a shot. Just go out and give it a shot. So I finished school with every intention of being a hospital administrator, and I started working for the Sisters of Mercy, who are out of Cincinnati. And the first thing when I got there, I had a full-time job, but they were trying to buy other hospitals. And so I volunteered to be the guy that would be the liaison between the hospital and the consultants and the lawyers and the accountants and the priests and the nuns and all the other people that had a say in every decision that we were going to make. So what that means is I learned what questions lawyers ask, what questions accountants ask. It was one of the greatest learning experiences of my life. And after about 6 months, one of the consultants said, "Do you like doing this kind of work?" And I said, "I sure do." And I got a note from Arthur Andersen in Atlanta, which at the time I thought of as the big city. And Arthur Andersen at the time, I don't know if you guys have studied them, they're a historical subject now. They were Enron's auditor, so they no longer exist. But it was a fantastic company. It was the largest accounting firm in the world. And I got a job pretty much sight unseen because I had volunteered to help the hospital in the M&A process. When I was at Arthur Andersen, I did auditing, Medicare reimbursement, Medicaid reimbursement, all the really exciting stuff, as you can tell. And I also met a former competitor while I was there, who was a swimmer at the University of Tennessee. I re-met a former competitor. And he was my stockbroker, and for a couple of years we talked about this idea that we had for a hedge fund. And eventually we decided that in October of 1994 we stopped talking about it, started doing it. And that's an important thing. At some point you have to start doing it. You have to start moving ahead. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any investors. So again, I volunteered and I put together the prospectus for the fund. I co-wrote the investment thesis. We begged, pleaded door to door for 6 months. We paper traded for 6 months. In other words, we implemented our plan in Excel, not with a broker, to see if it would work. And paper trading's not perfect. It's a little easier to take a loss when it's in your Excel spreadsheet and not in your bank account. But we worked on it for 6 months, and eventually we got a little bit of money in. So what is a hedge fund? A hedge fund is simply an investment partnership. It's a little different than a mutual fund, which is usually buy shares of. You've got limited partners that put money in, and you've got a general partner that makes all the investment decisions. And we were the general partner, and the company was called Masters Capital. And the funds were called the Marlin Fund. Depending on the rules of the hedge fund, you can be more aggressive, but some are not. Some are truly hedged. They're market neutral. But we did not run ours that way. Interesting things came up in the process of fundraising. When you ask people for money, that's where the rubber hits the road. People can, there's a saying for that. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it here at the school. But that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. It's one thing to talk to people about a situation. It's another thing to ask them for some of their money. And we got some amazing reasons that people gave us not to invest. Some of my favorites were, you can't have a hedge fund in Atlanta, Georgia. This was 1994, by the way. You can't have a hedge fund in Atlanta, Georgia. Well, why not? Why not? You could have a horse farm out of Kentucky, outside of Kentucky. I know you guys wouldn't approve of it, but there's no reason why you can't have a hedge fund not in New York City. But a lot of people had that view. You're going to find people have many biases, and they're not going to coincide with what you're doing. They may not be in line with what you're thinking. You just have to keep going. But that was one of my favorite ones. My next favorite one, this was probably my favorite one. Neither one of you went to an Ivy League school. And I never said it out loud, but my reaction is that's probably a good thing. Because if you're in the investment community and you're doing exactly what everyone else is doing, it's very difficult to outperform under that kind of a scenario. So if you went to the Wharton School, like the other 74 managers at Fidelity, every meeting you go to, they're going to have the same thought process, the same methodology, and they're going to come to the same conclusions you come to, which is the horrible way to invest. Investing in a herd is not a successful strategy. I keep saying it's my favorite one. These are all actually, in retrospect, I didn't enjoy them at the time, but people frequently said, well, you've never done this before. Well, nobody's ever done anything until they do it, you know? I mean, if you just for fun, if you want to do something fun, go look at the picture from the 1978 prospectus when Microsoft went public, and look at that picture and tell me if you would have invested in that company. You wouldn't have, trust me. So, but that was another thing people told us. But if you guys have studied the market of all, this is probably my favorite reason of all. People told us in 1994, you cannot trade stocks. You have to buy and hold. There's no such thing. You can't trade stocks. We buy and hold. Well, that was 1994, so if they bought and held, they got ham-boned in 2000, they got ham-boned in 2008, and they're probably right where they started. The market's been very volatile, but I came to love all of those reasons. Finally, we raised $700,000. $700,000 is not a lot of money to manage. People today wouldn't start a hedge fund without $25 or $50 million. And my job was to cover healthcare stocks and to manage the syndicate. So healthcare stocks, basically, I evaluated companies within businesses. I tried to find the best company within each sector. I tried to find companies that had changes, fundamental changes, that were going to change the perception and the reality of the company. And it's a fascinating job. It's a lot of details. It's a lot of number crunching. It's a lot of going to meetings, meeting with management, trying to figure out who's telling you I don't want to say the truth, the more accurate reflection, and who's sort of trying to make everything sound good. Syndicate is all about relationships. So syndicate is how Wall Street gets money from investors to companies. So we're talking about IPOs, we're talking about secondary offerings, we're talking about convertible debt. One thing we had, and when you're new in a business and you're competing with well-established people, you have to have a hook. You have to have something that you're willing to do that your peers aren't willing to do. And our hook was the way people sold hedge fund services, if you will, was called 2 and 20. And they took 2% at the beginning of the year, and they took 20% of the profit at the end of the year. And I call that the either way I win strategy. And you know, if you think about it, if you get $1 billion under management and you get 2 and 20, before you turn the lights on January 1st, you made $20 million. And that's a pretty good situation for the fund manager. It is not a good situation for the investor. And so what we did is we said, we're not going to take a penny until we make twice LIBOR. LIBOR is the London Interbank Offering Rate. You can think of it as the prime rate. As with most interest rates now, it's low. It's about 1.2%, but at the time it was about 4%. So that meant that until we made 8%, we didn't make a penny. But after we made 8%, we took a graduated fee schedule. And what this means, moreover, is that our interests and our investors' interests are completely 100% aligned. We're not going to make money unless they make money. And that's about as aligned as you can be. We turned portfolio theory on its head. Portfolio theory, if you've got any finance folks in here, basically says you want to diversify your risk so much that you don't have any stock-specific risk. So in other words, you want your position in Medtronic or GE or J&J to be so small that if they get killed, it won't kill your portfolio. We did the exact opposite. We took stock-specific risk, but we took for periods of time. And we set up a computer system that tracked every stock based on characteristics that we thought were important. And we tried to specifically take stock-specific risk going into an event. So in my world, that would be like an FDA panel meeting, something like that. Well, nobody can predict what the FDA is going to say about any one product. If you do know what the FDA is going to say, you shouldn't invest in it. That's called insider trading. And those of us that don't know, you can't predict. Nobody's right all the time. And so what we decided is that we would rather make 8 or 10% in front of an event on a lot of different positions rather than holding core positions and essentially hoping and praying that the FDA saw things the way that we did. And it turned out it was a very successful strategy. The syndicate job was really to build relationships with Wall Street. And like every other relationship that you're going to have in your life for the rest of your life, it comes down to one thing. Can people trust you? And I can't emphasize that enough. Wall Street transactions, you do multi-million-dollar trades with people you've never met over the phone. You've got to be a trustworthy person. You've got to be the kind of person that sometimes takes their perspective and not always your perspective. It's vitally important in trading, but I would say in any relationship that you have. I had some interesting experiences as a Southerner trying to relate to Wall Street folks. I don't know if it was my accent, which I don't even think I have an accent, but they did, and or the fact that we were from Atlanta. But I'll never forget meeting with a company named Lehman Brothers, and the guy, they took us out to lunch, and the guy leaned across the table and he said, "Bill, I just want you to know that my father told me a long time ago that just because you're not from Manhattan doesn't mean you don't have a brain." Which I interpreted it that it was possible that I had a brain, so I took it as a compliment. And but you know, you just have to let things like that slide off your back. My job was to build a relationship with this guy and his firm, and not worry about things like that. I actually thought it was kind of funny when he said it. We continued to do business with Lehman Brothers until 2008, when they became the first victim of the collateralized debt obligation crisis that roiled the whole country and the economy. In 2008, they had too much exposure to that, and they went out of business. Starting in 1995, when we started trading, we had 60 consecutive months of positive performance. And we went from $700,000 to $700 million under management. The average annual return for the fund through this last year, which is 22 years, was 26%. They now have 22 employees and manage $900 million and still going strong. You don't have a hedge fund for 20 years without getting a few scars. We had our first down year in 2002, and if you're a student of the market, you know that the market went down 80% from 2000 to 2002. And we had our first down year in 2002. We were down 12%, and we went in a 3-month period of time from $700 million to $100 million under management. Very painful. All of the people that had been cheering were now jeering. There were no more Super Bowl tickets. It was a very painful process, but it was an instructive process. It's been said, and I believe this is 100% true, you learn more from losing money than making money, because when you make money, you just attribute it to your personal brilliance. When you lose money, you really have to search for what happened, why it happened, when it happened, what you could have and should have done differently. As you might be able to predict, when everybody pulled their money out right at the bottom of the crash in 2003, we were up 100% the next year, and everybody came back and said, "Hey, we want to get back in," and we told them about our rule, which is, if you stick with us, you can stay in. If you leave, once you're out, you're out. And so we didn't make any friends with that, but we felt like it was the right thing to do for the people that had supported us through the process. And, you know, quite frankly, being down 12% when the market's down 80% is not a defeat, if you ask me. In 2005, I started focusing elsewhere. Over time, my interest in drugs really went more from, well, how much Lipitor is Pfizer going to sell this quarter, to how does Lipitor work? And what is the next drug that's going to come online? And I came to the conclusion that I would like to develop a drug. I had a colleague from Harvard, and he had an idea that I had never heard of. Are there any biology folks in here? All right, I won't bore you with the idea. But I knew of no other drug that worked by that mechanism of action. And I thought if we could make this work, it was an idea. He had some animal data, but it was very early stage. And I thought if we could make this work, there is 1,000 applications for this. And so we formed a company called Celltaxis. And I left the hedge fund and went to the drug company. Celltaxis, cell is cell, and taxis means movement. And all of our drugs work by manipulating immune cell migration all over the body. Thus the need for the immune privileged tissue. I asked a friend of mine, has anybody in here read The Count of Monte Cristo? You have? You'll enjoy this. The rest of you need to read Count of Monte Cristo. I asked a friend of mine who had started and sold 3 drug companies for some advice when we first started. And we talked for 30 minutes and it was pretty general, and then he sent me a copy of the book, The Count of Monte Cristo. In other words, he was saying this is what you need to read to run a drug company. Count of Monte Cristo, the basic story is about a guy that is doing well in the world, and then he gets thrown in jail. His fiancée is told that he's run off, and she runs off. His father is allowed to die. Everything he has in the world, every possession, is stripped from him. But it has a happy ending. Well, if you consider revenge a happy ending, it has a happy ending. He gets his place back in the world. But I just thought that was an interesting advice from someone that knew the industry. Didn't send me a biology book, didn't send me a finance book, sent me The Count of Monte Cristo. It's actually quite a good book if you get a chance. So what does a drug company need to be successful? You need an idea. Then you need a molecule or a drug, either a small molecule like an aspirin or a large molecule like an antibody. You need to meet a therapeutic goal, obviously, and you need to do it in such a way that you do less harm than you do good. And then you need some intellectual property to protect it, and then you need an FDA approval. All we had was an idea. So we were very early in the process, so we decided to get started. On average, it takes 12 years and $800 million to get one drug FDA approved. First thing I had to do was license the technology from Harvard. A couple of interesting things about Harvard. A lot of people feel like they've paid Harvard a lot of money for an education. And I can tell you, after spending 3 weeks with 3 of their attorneys finishing this license, I feel like I also paid Harvard a lot of money for an education. The other interesting thing about Harvard is if you go to Harvard Yard and you walk around, you'll see a statue of John Harvard. And his left toe is gleaming because the students there, for good luck, go up and rub his left toe, left foot. And I thought that was interesting, but I'll take Daniel Boone over John Harvard any damn day of the week. So as I mentioned, we started with an idea. We had to prove what they call the mechanism of action, which is in a very detailed way how the drug is going to work, how the concept works. We partnered with the CDC. We partnered with the Ovarian Cancer Institute. We partnered with several companies. But we really took off in 2011, which you'll note is 6 years. It takes a while to develop drugs. We really took off in 2011 when we licensed the drug, in-licensed the drug from Bayer. If you've noticed, the drug companies buy each other a lot. You'll see that in the news. Pfizer buys American Home Products, buys Schering-Plough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They end up with assets that they don't know what to do with. You can only develop so many drugs. And so it is a very common strategy to license drugs from large pharmaceuticals. And we did that, licensed a drug from Bayer. Bayer is a German company. And if you know anything about German companies, they're known for their precision and attention to detail. And this drug was immaculately cared for and ready to be taken into human trials. We raised about $85 million, and today that drug is in phase 2. The FDA process goes phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 approval. There's a promise of a readout in cystic fibrosis in June of 2018, so that seems like a long time, but in drug company time, that's like tomorrow. It's a very exciting drug. It actually addresses the part of the disease that causes the progression and the destruction of lung tissue. If the company is successful, it will change the way that people with cystic fibrosis are treated. And so it's a very, very exciting technology. The company is fully capitalized. It has a suite of drugs. It has additional internal IP that we developed, but I didn't get any credit for, as I mentioned. I'm not bitter, though. I'm not bitter. At the end of 2016, I started the company that I work for now. And the basic thesis of the company was we were trying to bridge the gap that I saw as a drug company between ideas and when those ideas can get fully capitalized. Venture capitalists, now more than ever, if you study the history of the venture capital industry, there were companies like Kleiner Perkins and 50, 60 years ago that were trying to do things that are impossible, knowing that they would most likely fail, but in that process, they would find something that would create value. The industry now is much more focused on internal rate of return. All the finance guys can help you with that. But basically, the most important part of internal rate of return is time. So if your most important variable of how you're judged is time, you want to do things that happen quickly. So what you end up with is a lot of money dedicated to things like slightly better Prevacid or Prevacid that can be once a week or something like that, and not very much money dedicated to ideas that take longer to play out. So that was our whole philosophy, was that those companies also needed to see the light of day, and also, interestingly enough, because they had the most risk, because they were the earliest stage, they had the most upside. And as an investor, you're always looking for where the company is and where it could be, and it's hard to outperform buying Johnson & Johnson. You have to buy something that has risk in order to have the possibility of a return. Our three largest clients are a company called Pharma Concepts, and Pharma Concepts works with self-insured companies to lower their pharmaceutical pricing. We have a client called Aruna Biopharmaceuticals, and Aruna makes drugs that are derived from stem cells, specifically to treat stroke, and they will be in human trials in 2019. And then if any computer folks in the room, you might be interested in the third company. It's called Catalytic, and Catalytic is a software as a service company. And basically, they're doing what Bloomberg did 30 years ago for finance, but they're doing it for science. Bloomberg basically democratized access to financial information. Used to be real hard to find out the details of a company, 30 years ago. Bloomberg took every bit of data and made it accessible to anybody with a terminal. Catalytic's doing the same thing. So if you're doing medical research and you get the benefit of everybody else's medical research, it can't do anything but speed up the process. So they're probably doing all of us a favor, but they specifically do this for drug development companies. So people frequently ask me, probably the most common question I get is, how do you start with a piece of paper and end up with a phase 2 drug? How do you map that out and do that over a 10-year period of time? And in closing, I'll tell you, it's this simple. Figure out where the next buoy is and start swimming. Thank you very much, and go Big E. Sure. Not hard ones.
What?
Not hard ones.
Not hard ones?
Yeah.
Wait, we didn't ask you hard enough questions when you're a student here? If anyone has a question or two, if you'd like to ask Bill.
Yes, sir.
So you talked about taking chances by being creative and the importance of knowing when not to be creative. How best do you think you decide when to reach out and exemplify creativity or when to follow the norms?
That's a great question. The first thing I try to do is ask, is this problem ever been solved? So is it something that we're trying to do, and it may not be, you know, look outside your industry. Just break it into almost like a process map or a Gantt chart. And so in the hospital example, the problem was, how do I get information from people that I then want to send somewhere else, and I'm going to need to bill them at a later date? So how do I get all this information, get all this financial information, and then get them to where they want to go? And just so from that perspective, it was the ability to find a model from another industry. I really recommend, and I would be willing to buy, if you can make a list, I'll buy the book for anybody that wants it. It'll answer this question, or it's on YouTube. It's called The Medici Effect. If you look up, and the guy's name is Hans Johansson, and if you read that book, and it is not a thick book, it's a couple hours to read it, he gives example after example of different things that people have done to take that which had no value and make it valuable. So it's really to start from a place of asking, is this a problem that's ever been solved before? And then thinking through how it was solved, and if it has been, trying to adopt some of those principles from the earlier example. And then if there's not one, you got to go creative. Head for the Humane Society. It's amazing what you can get with pizza. You guys know that. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Bill. Thanks
Sure.
so much. Let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you.
Great job. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'll tell you, what at EKU, so you said it's why we do what we do. You as students are why we as faculty do what we do. And when alums like Bill come back and talk about the things that they've been able to do, that EKU prepared you and helped you launch a career, not just a career, not a job, but a career in many different ways, working for one of the big accounting firms, working in hospital management, entrepreneur, new ideas. You know, you also, you too, not like the rock group, but you too can, you too can do that, and that's what we are here at EKU doing, and that's what makes our day as faculty and staff here in the college, and we really appreciate it. I do want to say one editorial thing about the Medici Effect, and I would encourage you all to read the book if you haven't read it. It is, as Bill says, it's an easy read. I actually, when I came here as dean a few years ago, I actually talked about the book. I think maybe I even talked about it when I did my interview, and I did make a presentation to the faculty, because the Medicis were a family in Florence, Italy, that really launched the Renaissance. And what happened is they had this multidisciplinary group of people that came there: architects, artists, business, transportation, shipping, church, state, everything. And they launched the Renaissance, which in the history of the world was phenomenal. So the idea of the Medici Effect is you bring together a very interdisciplinary group, and you can launch things. And that's when I look at our College of Business and Technology. From my view, we also can create the Medici Effect here. So we have all of these business disciplines along with a variety of technology disciplines, and then we're housed at a campus that has all of this kind of university, if you will, that does it. So frankly, I'd forgotten that I read that book a few years ago. It was a good one.
I would be happy to buy, if there's a mechanism to do that. It's a book that you will use if you read it. Trust me.
Yep. So. Well, listen, thanks again, Bill, for your time today. Thanks all for coming, and we appreciate it. Appreciate you being here to hopefully be inspired as future entrepreneurs, launching your careers from your EKU education. As Bill says, go Big E. Thanks much. Enjoy your day. Great job.